you mentioned mass formation psychosis.
Yes.
And in regards to this war, what is that about?
It's basically about all of the media apparatuses coming together to convince the population of a certain position. So, this is the NPC meme. Previous generations would call this groupthink, but now it's being called mass formation psychosis. And you'll notice how overnight, a consensus was formed that being pro-Ukraine is the correct position. There was virtually no media outlet that was willing to offer a counter position. At best, you would see, well, let's wait for more, let's maybe be neutral, but you would not see a pro-Russia position or an anti-Ukraine or anti-NATO position. It just didn't exist. And there were sort of, I guess, breadcrumbs leading to this with things like Black Lives Matter or even the COVID narrative. But with both of those, with Black Lives Matter, for example, that didn't become a household name until 2020, sure, but that started in 2014 with Trayvon Martin. You had in 2016 with Michael Brown. So there were stepping stones leading up to it becoming like a huge thing, but now it's like gone. With the COVID narrative too, that was initially the left wing being skeptical of it because they thought that Donald Trump was trying to use that to manufacture a crisis to stay in power. And then once it became clear that it was going to be a segue for mail-in voting, which could fortify the election in a way that was advantageous to them, then they all became very outspokenly in support of it. But in terms of the subscription rates from the whole country and also the expediency in which they were able to achieve that, the Ukraine thing really is the greatest example. I mean, you had people on the left, people on the right, all coming together saying that we have to support Ukraine, that Russia's the enemy. They were activating this boomer tier Cold War nostalgia. You had members of Congress, posing with this flag, this disgusting hybrid flag they'd created. It was a mixture of the American flag and the Ukrainian flag. And the average American held the position that Ukraine was good, but also has no idea where it is on a map, of course, but also has no idea what our interests are in that country. They just think back to, oh, I saw Red Dawn. I played a video game one time where the Russians were the bad guys, so I guess they really are the biggest threat to my freedom instead of my own government, which actually is the case.
I'm glad you dropped out of college. You wouldn't be this smart had you stayed.
It's true. It is true.
I'm really glad, man. So how do you feel like, where do you get the energy from that you do this research and know all this stuff? You have more details about what's really happening than the average media person, especially liberal media and some conservative. Where do you get the energy to put all this together?
I would like to say that it's love of country, but if I really had to be honest, I would say it's probably spite. Because when I was in high school, there were a lot of these, liberal elite types who always gave me a hard time because I basically just wanted to cause mischief with my friends. And I would still be in the same advanced classes as these kids. I would still actually score higher on standardized tests, which of course are a proxy for an IQ test. I would score higher on every metric by which you would want to measure excellence. I was still outperforming these people, but they would always roll their eyes at me because I would talk during class or I'd be on my phone looking at memes or whatever. And I always kind of felt this sense of wanting to prove these people wrong, because then when I became outspokenly conservative, they gave me a really hard time. I was in the principal's office at least once a week, which, it's not the end of the world, but it was because they would submit anonymous tips to the school district and accuse me of being involved in hate groups, accuse me of being involved in all sorts of weird things because I would voice an opinion in my high school AP US history class. So they gave me a really hard time. And so I more or less decided that my overriding ambition for the rest of my life is going to be to make these types of people's lives as difficult as possible, because these are the types of kids that grow up to be the ones occupying the bureaucracy, to be the ones trying to become senators. They have no regard for the people who they perceive to be lower than them. They don't actually care. They just want to masturbate to their own self-perception of, oh, I'm a senator. I'm a really sophisticated intellectual. I read from the New York Times bestseller list. And it's like, no, you're not that smart. You're not that cool. And I'm not going to do anything to you, but I will try to make your life a little bit harder, I suppose.
Yeah, they're on an ego trip. Will you run for president one day, you think?
I don't know if we'll have a country by that point, but I think that I think I'll be around for a while in terms of the conversation. I don't know exactly what chair I'll end up in, but I think I'll be around for a while.
Right on. You have said that 95% of people are NPCs.
True.
What is NPC? What is that, NPCs?
So an NPC comes from a video game, and they're non-playable characters. So the idea is that NPCs just exist as accessories to, the character storyline. So to call someone an NPC is to basically say that they don't have agency. They're not capable of thinking about things critically, forming their own thoughts. They're basically just waiting what to be told by the power structures in society. And so I think, yeah, that's a fair estimate that 95% of people are like this.
Yeah.
They'll get up, they'll get dressed, they'll, eat some food, they'll go to work, and they'll turn on NPR, and they will basically be confident that whatever they're hearing from the media is what is true. But these people also, if you talk to them and poll them and ask them, do you think the media lies? They'll say, of course the media lies. But they won't actually connect the dots as to the cognitive dissonance that they're experiencing while still believing all the things that the media tells them.
You, reflecting on when I first talked to you back in 2019, and now you've definitely grown. Your strength is so apparent now. And how would an NPC overcome, because you seem to be your own man, doing your own thing, and you have courage. How does an NPC become like that? How do you overcome being an NPC?
I don't think it's possible, actually. I think that people who perhaps agree with NPCs can eventually recognize that they're not doing their own research. And these are the people who will feel compelled to seek out truth. But I think that people who at their core have no desire to seek out truth, I think that's basically intrinsic to who they are as people. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I mean, that's human nature. The problem is that the people who are in charge of telling them what is true are trying to purposefully drive them away from God and away from the truth.
Yeah.
And that's the real problem. I actually don't think that people should have to know about politics. I really don't. I think that it's actually a symptom of a bad society that people feel as though they have to be glued into the 24-hour news cycle all day. I think that we should have a government, and we did for a very long time, that was going to act in the best interest of its people. And it was actually true that you could just get up, go to work, put food on the table for your family, and you wouldn't have to follow the 24-hour news cycle. You read the paper, oh, they built a park. Oh, they spent too much money on the roads. Damn it, I don't like the way they're wasting my tax dollars. But you wouldn't have to know all the facts and figures the way that, I do now. And I think it's actually unhealthy that so many young people, by necessity though, are getting involved in politics because they recognize that if somebody doesn't do something, we're not going to have a country for them to live in.
I was thinking of, now that you've explained what NPC mean, and you're right, it's hard for an NPC or people who are like that to overcome that. Non-NPCs are like that when they're kids. They're not NPC, even as a kid. And I've spoken to people around the world over these last 32 years, and when they're a little kid, there was something about them that was different than the rest of the kids, or what probably NPC kids then. But you're either born that way or you're not. It's already with you or it's not. What would you say about that?
I completely agree with that. I think it really, and it's sad because we really want to believe, the most common question I get, I'm sure you get this all the time, is how do I change people's minds about something?
Yeah.
And it's like, you're not talking about somebody who is just apolitical. I mean, you're talking about people who are wearing like triple masks inside of their cars. Like that person is never going to be able to be red pilled. So
right.
So yeah, unfortunately, it really just is a matter of people who have the capacity to get it or people who just don't. And I found that once they do get it, they get it pretty quickly. Like I think that I started to really get things when I was like in high school. And I can remember agreeing with arguments that I see adults making now when I was like 12 years old, particularly about God. I would read these very basic atheist arguments and I would say, that makes sense, because that was before I came back to Christianity. And I can now see people reciting those same arguments. And I was like, wow, I believed that when I was like 10 years old. That's so funny that you never got past that point. You never sought out the truth. You were very comfortable with like staying at that point.
In your video, you talk about guarding your own, one of your videos, you talk about guarding your own heart. What do you mean by that?
Well, that was something my mom always used to tell us. I think it comes from Proverbs, actually, which is that you have to guard your heart. And she would tell this to my sister. She'd be dating boys and you have to be careful with, who you fall for because, you can get hurt. But I think that also pertains to how we view politics and media.
Yeah.
Because when they were pitching the Ukraine war, you didn't have an official coming on and saying, okay, here are the arguments for it, here are the arguments against it. You had pandering. You had emotional propaganda. You had pictures and videos of bombed out buildings, of mothers carrying children. All of these things were designed to emotionally manipulate people.
Yeah.
And that's why we get so frustrated as non-NPCs, as
Yeah.
protagonists, arguing with these people like they can't argue from logic. And it's like, of course not. They can only argue from emotion because they were only convinced by emotion. And so, yeah, with all this propaganda, that's like what it serves, the emotional purpose. And emotions are what compels people to act. And
Yeah.
that's the problem. I'm not going to read something and say, oh, it turns out that this is true. I'm going to bring now my passion to fight for this. That's why you could never sit down with one of these like pro-mask people, for example, over coffee, 6 feet apart, I guess, and convince them of your position. It would never happen. They would maybe say, if you completely embarrassed them and they had no argument left, they would say, well, I just need to do more research, and they would leave. They would never say, you know what, you're right, and bring that same passion, that same energy to your side. Same thing with abortion advocates. They would never bring that same indignation to the pro-life side. It would just never happen. So emotions above all else are what compels people to act. And so when I say guard your heart, that means you have to be very careful about what you allow to manipulate your emotions, to manipulate your heart, because they want you to be glued to the screen. Oh, this tragedy happened. We have to do this. Look at this thing that happened. It's so terrible. And as men, I think we're less susceptible to this than women. But that doesn't mean we don't recognize tragedy when it happens.
Right.
But we're blessed with the resolve to be able to say, well, just because this is bad doesn't mean we have to throw all of our eggs into this basket, which obviously isn't going to work. We're much more able to divorce, emotional reactionary ideas from what is actually true and real and what works. But as men have become more feminine over the last few decades, this has coincided with that 24-hour news cycle, with the complete syndication of politics and media everywhere you go. So now you see all of these men, not coincidentally, in support of these emotionally driven narratives.
Yep.
And these are things that their grandfathers would have belted them for. Like, you really believe that, you idiot?
That is so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did. In guarding your heart against media propaganda, I saw that when I see that with the Ukraine situation. They always show these women crying and kids on the road, and what about the kids, and blown up buildings, and so many people falling for it because they do become emotional. And also with with this whole shooting that happened in New York, upstate New York somewhere, with the white guy shooting the black people, accused of shooting the black people. They make it all emotional. But if it was the other way around, it would be non-emotional because they want the white person to look like a white supremacy, they call it. And so they'll make it where they get you angry rather than all sad, and then so you can strike out at white people. That is amazing to see that. I'm blown away how smart you are, man.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Wow.
That's a tremendous endorsement.